Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack here. Monday now, the 24th of March, 2025. A lot of numbers to keep up with. Good to have you with me today. We're going to talk about some hurricane signals to keep an eye on, sort of the keys to the game over the next several weeks and months. It's almost time, not quite, but we are starting to look at some of these signals to see which way things might tip. Remember, nothing's going to tell us about impacts and where hurricanes might end up. We can only look at the bigger picture and glean what information is out there. We're still at the infancy of this thing, even though we've been trying to predict it for a good 30 years or so with seasonal forecasts. We all know there's a long way to go. That being said, however, there are some big puzzle pieces that we can keep an eye on, and that's part of my job. We'll also take a look actually at the front end today, current weather events, a few odds and ends things, and then of course severe weather starting to really ramp up now that we're getting into the warm months, and then we will get into the hurricane season stuff. All right? Good to have you with me. Let's get started. First of all, this was really cool. I like sharing things that I see on the social media. The aurora was out the other night, Friday night into Saturday. Friday was the best night. This was a really cool time lapse that's popped up in the algorithm side of my Twitter, the For You, as they say. Just really neat stuff. I like this, and thought I'd share it with you. Give Shane a follow if you like that kind of stuff. The east side of Lake Ontario up there. God, I bet that was absolutely fantastic. So I'm glad I got to see it this way, and I thought I would share it with you. This, too, is really like, wow, yesterday over in Texas. So is this Kerrville or Carville? I know we have like Carr Lake in North Carolina that's spelled sort of the same way. We have Carr Avenue. Whatever. We'll call it Kerrville and just be done with it. The bottom line, though, listen to this. That's the sound of the hail. Let's mute it. Go full screen on it. This is a video. Look at that. Big old hail. It is hail season. We're going to be getting out there later in April into May, June, and July with season 2 of our hail project. And this is why. Hail is very destructive. It is a fascinating hydrometeorite. And boy, it causes a lot of headache too. So there's a big project this year called Ice Chip. We're going to talk about this more later on, but this caught my attention, and I thought I would share it with you as well. Hail season very much upon us, as is severe weather. Today, though, not a lot happening out there. It's not to say there's nothing. Some severe weather potential down here, some high wind gusts in Louisiana lately, but low severe risk today, but that doesn't mean none. But check out the meteorology here. This is pretty cool. Clearly, you got a ridge sitting out here and a trough over here. I mean, you can literally see it in the satellite animation. Here's your trade winds coming through the western Atlantic into the Caribbean Sea. Just a neat set of things going on. There's white sands in New Mexico. This is the snow-capped Sierra. Some snow down in parts of the, the Wasatch Range and elsewhere in Utah, the Rockies. Just a bunch of cool things that you can see through the satellite animation this afternoon. Luckily, though, not a lot of high-impact weather going on. A lot of wind out there, and that can be certainly impactful, but this map, relatively scant in terms of big-time weather impediments. So whether you're traveling by air, maybe you're on a train, Amtrak, whatever, or you're a trucker going across this great country of ours, not a lot of bad weather to have to deal with today. But things will change. They always do in the weather department, and that's what we'll talk about as we go forward. But at least for today, not too darn bad out there, considering we're getting towards April and May, and those are our peak severe weather months. So let's look at the GFS here over the next week or so, and we're going to look at it from a few perspectives. First, the regular surface map, and you can see different storm systems coming across the lower 48 between now and next week. But nothing that really stands out as being like, whoa, look at that. A few systems, certainly, but no major widespread, Katie bar the door type events, whatever. But still, as we get towards the end of March into April, severe weather threats will be on the increase. So what do we have individually? Well, it looks like more active weather coming in to the northwest part of the country, southerly flow through the Gulf into the nation's midsection around this Bermuda High sitting out here, almost right over Bermuda. Hey, how about that? And, again, some snow in the higher latitudes up here and in the higher elevations of the west. Still, first day of spring was a few days ago, but some winter weather still trying to hang on, and that's what gives us this clash of the different air masses and the different dynamics in the atmosphere that leads to severe weather. The other thing I want to show you is how the temperatures are going to be over the next week or so. A really big warm-up is coming, and let's just take this out to day 5 here, Saturday afternoon into evening. Pretty warm east of the Rockies and south of like Interstate 80 up here, roughly, right? 70, whatever it is. And did you know, like I-10's down here, then you got I-20 and I-40. The numbers get higher the farther north you go. If you didn't know that, now you do. But yes, the warmth is starting to creep in to the south. But look what happens as we go through time. It gets even more prevalent. I promise it's going to get there. There you go. Look at that. By the time we get out beyond day 7, this is day 8 now, April 1st, hopefully not April Fools, because I like the warm weather. I think most of us do. And it looks like it's coming. The heat's going to build across the south, all the way from the desert southwest to the southeast U.S. And with that, the return flow around that high out here, coming through the warm Gulf, and it is pretty warm out here. I'll show you the anomalies in a minute. That's going to bring that moisture transport north, and then any storm that comes in that has the dynamics with it, shear profiles, high lapse rates, all that stuff, we could get some severe weather. In fact, we will over the next several days, and that's a good way to segue into this. Today, limited thunderstorm activity mainly along the Gulf Coast. Tomorrow, a few small areas of just general convective activity, but no widespread severe weather outbreaks by day 3. A little bit more, including some possibilities of severe weather out here in Washington, Oregon, and in Idaho. Might see some grapple or nerd hail, as my friend Greg Nordstrom likes to call it. It's kind of like that formative hail, looks like nerd candy. That's a real, I don't know if it's meteorologically, like if that's in a journal somewhere, but I like that description. Then, check this out. Let's just jump over to day 7. A lot of comments about this on the internet today, social media, internet, whatever that means these days, about how big this 15% is all the way out to day 7. And it's because, remember, it's about the impacts. This isn't a 15% chance that there's going to be a bunch of tornadoes. With hurricanes and severe weather, we need to think about the totality of the event. When there are hurricanes coming, we don't just need to focus on what category it is and how high the winds are and have that tunnel vision that's going to dictate how you react. Same thing with severe weather. The 15% is for some type of severe weather, all the different modes, straight line wind, hail, giant hail, large hail, destructive hail, and certainly the threat of tornadoes. Tornadoes seem to be the shark in the story. Remember the movie Jaws? I've talked about this a lot of times over my career. You say barracuda and people are like, what? Whatever. You say shark and you get people's attention. Same thing probably holds with tornado threats when you're talking about severe weather. But we need to unthink that way and reprogram ourselves to look at that and go, okay, that's a large chunk of the country that is possibly going to see severe weather, travel disruptions, impacts, that's the word, over the next week or so, coming up at about day 7. And if we look at the different cities that could be impacted, well, there you go. And different interstates that cross this area. Yes, so we'll be watching that closely as we get out towards the first part of April, right? All right, so let's move along now. For some reason, this is out of order, so we're going to scooch him over there. And let's take a look at this. This is our sea surface temperature anomaly, and it's a different perspective on this map. I was looking back through their archives over at the NESDIS site, or whatever it's called now. Do you know what year this is from? Anyone? So this would be from last year, 2024, on this exact date. And when we were looking at this, we were all thinking, oh boy, look at all of those very positive anomalies here in the tropical Atlantic, extending up towards where the Canary Current would be, the warm Caribbean, the warm Gulf. Yeah, it was like, uh-oh. And we had a very high output of forecast numbers from pretty much all the agencies out there. Some of them were pretty ridiculous, as we now can recall. Won't name any names, but this was the look that we thought, wow, we're going to have an historic season. And obviously in many ways it was. Look at how damaging Helene and Milton were. and we could dig into all of that. But, again, it's all about the impacts, not the numbers at the end of the day. But this is one of those puzzle pieces. Global sea surface temperature anomalies and global sea surface temperatures just as a whole drive what happens with the weather. You have the oceans and their heat. You have the land mass that heats up. But the oceans retain a lot of heat energy, and that gets released through water vapor and what we call latent heat. It's just laying there waiting. That's why we call it latent. And last year was pretty concerning. What about this year? Well, there is some good news. The overall background state of the Atlantic has come down. So we're not looking at the extremes that we saw last year. There's been a pretty strong subtropical ridge sitting out here, blasting the trade winds. Maybe that's too strong of a term, but it certainly has mixed things up. So things have changed. We're not having the relaxed trades through this area that gave us the very warm anomalies that we saw in 23 and especially 24. However, we still have a pretty warm northeast Atlantic sitting up here relative to average. When I say pretty warm, again, we're talking anomalies. And a pretty darn warm western Atlantic and Caribbean. And then the Gulf, look, it's always going to be warm enough for tropical cyclones of high intensity. So I look at this more as a severe weather and overall precipitable water driver than affecting hurricane season, unless it's just substantially below normal once we get to June and beyond. So we'll worry about that later. But the key regions through here, pretty significant change from last year, and this is pretty significant certainly. But here's where I want to caution you. You look at that, and if you know what you're looking at, you might think, wow, this year should be much tamer, much less active. Well, that might be the case, but I know it's cliche. I certainly do. It only takes one, and we really had two major events for the U.S. last year, Helene and Milton, and those could have been the only two that formed, and it still would have been a truly disastrous year. So the one thing that I look at when I see this, because I have experience, I think, all right, so we got that. Let's take the telestration away so I can prove this point better. We have the cooler anomalies through here. Okay, that's great. But we're still going to have the pretty active the easterly jet there, the tropical waves and all that. And so you say, all right, so it's cooler here. Maybe they don't develop here. And they start blossoming right about 55 degrees longitude and points west. Hey, guess what? That's where most of us that care about hurricanes live. So that's interesting because of what I'm going to show you in just a little bit from our good friend Ben Knoll. So we might have lower overall numbers, but that doesn't tell us a darn thing about impact. We just don't know. The steering currents, how things set up even for a couple of weeks, sub-seasonal, and then even micro details like what's it going to be like just for 2 days. Remember Michael in 2018 found perfect conditions right there, and that was a very short window, and the water temperatures were just, this is not 2018, but I'm just saying you only need 48 hours. Harvey 2017 had about a 48-hour window, even 24 hours really. Those short fuses, those are the hardest ones to predict, and no seasonal forecast is going to be able to tell us that. But these different puzzle pieces are interesting. The other part of it, the INSO, the state of the El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomenon, definitely have warmed things up off the coast of South America relative to average over the last several weeks. And that's going to be interesting to see how things play out with that. And for some clues, we can look at the subsurface. So this is literally a slice of right through here. If you went down in the vertical, that's what it would look like. So there's your extreme, and that's pretty, we're getting on up there, right? Extreme warmth in the far eastern Pacific, but look, very cold water lurks below. That's the subsurface. All you're going to need is a resumption of the stronger trades, and this gets upwelled in a heartbeat. So this is a very thin zone of positive anomalies. The rest of the Pacific, way on out past the date line, very cold, moderately cold, we'll say, below the surface there. So any strong resumption of easterly trades coming across the top like this, and this is going to get mixed out, and we're going to have cooler to maybe neutral conditions prevailing probably for the next several months. So that combined with what we're seeing with the anomaly charts here, it's going to be an interesting season, perhaps one that's going to be kind of difficult to figure out. This is also a really cool way I like to look at things on a map, but it's also nice to be able to plot things on various and sundry graphs. Now, I didn't plot this. I found it over on the Twitter, and I thought I would share it with you. Look at where we are. This is interesting, too. So 2025 so far is this color right here. I will highlight it in green to make it pop out better. So this is where we are right now. There's the green, and we're on the uptrend a little bit. We are ahead of 2023 for now. And look what happened in 2023. Once we got into May and June, we had these big spikes where the anomalies really jumped up. So that's another key to this. Will we see a relaxation of the subtropical ridge in the spring, like later into spring, that allows the Atlantic to start to warm up again, similar to what we saw in 2023 that lasted into 2024? We don't know that. There's no way to really predict that. There's different long-range maps and forecasts and ensembles, whatever, but we don't know. Like, that was not foreseen. Believe me, that was a very big shock to all of us when we saw that abnormal warming 2 years ago coming up in just a few weeks' time, 2 years ago, 2023. So we're ahead of where we were 2 years ago, yet to be seen if we start to spike again, so stay tuned. I'll pull this map up from time to time. And by the way, if you want to bookmark it, I believe that's how you can find it, right there. All right, so take a minute, jot that down, and you can keep up with this at home, the play-along version at home. CFS, one of many different ways to look at the modeling for the ENSO. Again, that's El Nino Southern Oscillation. And this thing has been up, it's been down, and you're going to get that. We're in the spring predictability barrier. This is the time of year nature's undergoing seasonal changes, and it's hard to lock things down and figure things out. Of course it is. It's Mother Nature, right? But the general idea is for a resumption of strong trade winds, and we get back into cool neutral, maybe weak La Nina conditions. But then the latest guidance here suggesting we start to warm up towards the end of hurricane season, maybe getting close to El Nino thresholds, but very, very weak. Again, we'll watch this. It's only late March. We'll take a look at this every couple of weeks or so and see how this is evolving over time. So this is interesting as it relates back to what I was saying about this with the cool anomalies in the eastern and central Atlantic right now. I mean, that's right now. What's it going to look like August 23rd? We don't know. But the guidance is starting to come out. Let me refresh this so it'll animate. Thank you very much. There we are. Ben Knoll put this out the other day that the ECMWF velocity potential shows general rising motion. This is May. This is June, and I want to point this out. Look at that. Very strong rising motion over Africa, bleeding out into the Atlantic and the East Pac, probably a busy June in the East Pac. But Africa, this is your obviously stretched flat Earth version of the Mercator projection. So, I can't... Ben has some pretty good 3D renderings of this stuff, but Africa's lit up, put it that way. So strong easterly waves probably going to try to come out, and if we get that Central American gyre going, I don't know, June could be interesting for the Caribbean and our Gulf Coast friends. We'll have to see about that. Then as we get into July, still very solid rising motion. I'll draw your attention over here. Over Africa, sinking motion over the Atlantic basin. So July, we'll see what gets spit out into the Atlantic and then what local environments are like between Tuts and different areas of upper level lows and whatnot. We'll have to see. And then finally August, which is where this ends. Very favorable look over the Indian Ocean and Africa, which would send those tropical waves out into the Atlantic. And all they have to do is find some area to blossom. And if that's close to where we live, yes, we could have problems. So sort of a mixed bag as to what to expect as we get towards the start of the season. And to that end, as I start to wrap this up for today's video, Colorado State leading the way all the way back to the mid-80s with doing seasonal forecasting. And I want to make a very valid point here because I know there's going to be people that will say, and you've probably already said it, who cares? They always get it wrong, all the negativity. Hey, look, science is always an evolving process. And even something that is 40 years old is nothing in the scale of geologic time. And we are only at the beginning of this, if you think about it. The math, the physics, the supercomputers, all the analogies that we can look at what we call analog seasons. This is still in its infancy. 40 years is a drop in the bucket. You got to start somewhere. Maybe we never get better than what we're already seeing. I don't know the future, but maybe we do. So that and the fact that Dr. Klotzbach is a friend of mine, I am a little biased, but it is interesting that we can at least see the bigger picture as to whether or not the season on a whole will be active versus quiet. That part has gotten pretty darn good over those 40 years. So to that end, the 2025 edition will be released and talked about in great detail from the National Tropical Weather Conference. 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 3rd of April, I'll be down there, and we will end today's discussion with a little advertisement, or advertisement, depending on which part of the pond you live on. If you get the idea. Hopefully you get the joke. If not, ask your dad. National Tropical Weather Conference coming up, and I will be there amongst other colleagues. Looking forward to that very much. I've got the educational thing we're doing with the students there, the student conference. That's on Tuesday, and then the conference begins Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, with all kinds of stuff, with awareness stuff and hurricane preparedness, meteorologists, broadcasters. Brian Norcross going to be there, Britta Merwin from Fox Weather, all sorts of other folks. Looking forward to it. And I've got, trying to drop me out here, I've got 3 presentations I'm doing, probably one of my busiest ones ever. So yeah, and if you can go, it's still available, so check it out. If you're going to be there, drop me a line. Let me know on Twitter and on the YouTube comments. Hey, I'm going to be there, and I'd love to meet you if you've not been there before. All right? And if you have, I've probably already met you. All right. Let me jump back on real quick and say my goodbyes for today. So that conference is next week. I travel Monday, so no video coming up on Monday. I'll probably do one Tuesday or something from South Padre Island. So no more stuff this week. Got to finish up preparing and whatever. Generally speaking, severe weather scene pretty quiet. No big deal coming up. So this is it until next week from South Padre, which will be the first part of April. So that's it for March. That's it for me for today. Thank you as always for tuning in. I am Mark South from all of us at HurricaneTrack. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week from South Padre Island, Texas.